Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm a graduate of Ghana Christian International High School. I urge you all to subscribe to HisGovTv. Thank you.
Hello there, you are welcome to my channel. Before we begin with our video lesson for today, I would like to remind you to subscribe to our channel if today is your first time. If you have already subscribed to, thank you very much for your support. So in today's lesson, I would like us to take and look at the contributions of Christianity to West Africa, and this falls under the broader topic Christian missionary activities in West Africa. Now, this topic is so important because it forms part of the 10 objective questions set by WAEC for the final exams for WASI, and so it is important that we discuss this topic. So let's begin with our lesson objectives for today. So by the end of this lesson, we should be able to discuss the contributions of Christianity to West Africa. What has been the role, the contribution that missionaries, played or have played so far in the history of West Africa after they came, they introduced the faith to the Africans. Now, this topic is very, very sensitive because of the nature of it. A lot of people say that Africans, we are more religious, and that's the more reason why we are not even developed. There is so much debate surrounding the activities of Christian missionaries. And so today, let's take a look at the contributions, and later we will look at the negative impact or effect of the introduction of Christianity. So let's begin with the first of the contribution. Now, the first of Christian contribution to West Africa had to do with the belief in one God. They believed in one God. Here you see believe in God, but it's supposed to believe in one God. Now, the Christian doctrine teaches the doctrine of one supreme God, all right? And it is opposed to the worship of many other forms of deity. Now, this point is very, very delicate in the sense that Africans before the introduction of Christianity, or West Africans before the introduction of Christianity, had an idea about God. So it is not as if that it was the Christian missionaries who introduced the idea of God to the African. The African belief or the idea about God was the existence of many gods. But what the Christian faith came to do was to introduce the idea of one God to the African. And so that monotheistic belief is what was introduced by the missionaries, not the idea of God, because Africans knew that there was a God. Now let's move on to the next of the contributions. The next contribution was terminating of obnoxious practices. So certain obnoxious or wicked practices of the West Africans were actually terminated by the European, by the missionaries. Example of such were human sacrifices, the killing of twins. Humans were used as means of sacrifice in most African or West African societies, and this was frowned upon by the missionaries, all right? Again, the killing of twins. Some African societies, not all of them, saw the birth of twins as a bad omen, and therefore some of them were being killed, and all these forms of obnoxious practices were actually terminated by the missionaries. Let's take a look at the next of the contribution had to do with the Christian missionaries and vocational skills. They also introduced certain vocational skills, more than one for that matter. This is not to say that Africans didn't have those kind of vocations. Yes, Africans had that informal education whereby they were learning informally, from their parents. The early missionaries set up craft institutions as part of their educational program, okay? And also, they also set up model farms where for scientific agriculture was taught, and new crops were also introduced to the people alongside the long-standing indigenous production. So, yes, Africans were into farming, they were into craft work, but the missionaries established, experimental farms and also established vocational institutions, all right? Yes, to train the West Africans in the use of their hands in craft work. And this was somehow done, using modern technologies and modern methods, unlike the indigenous ones. And so I think this was also a very great contributions of our Christian missionaries to West Africa, because today in Ghana, for instance, we are championing TVET, for which is the Technical and Vocational Institute. We are encouraging our children to go into such, ventures. Good. Let's take a look at the next of the contributions for the Christian missionaries and vernacular for literature. In Ghana, for instance, the Christian missionaries reduced the writings of many African countries, the languages of many African countries into writing. Many African countries didn't know how to write their languages. Their languages were not in a written form. It was the missionaries who decided to put Africans' languages into writing. Some they translated it for them and all of that. Let's take a look at some examples. In Ghana, for instance, the Presbyterians were pioneers in reducing the Ga and the Twi language into writing. So the Presbyterians or the Basel, they wrote the Ga and the Twi. They studied for the language and they wrote it. In 1858, Reverend Jonas Zimmerman also wrote a grammar on the Ga language, all right? And then in 1874, Reverend J. Jean Christoller also produced a Twi grammar and a dictionary as well. While the Evangelical Presbyterian missionaries were also the first to also develop literature in Ewe, and the Roman Catholic were also responsible for the Nzima literature. So today, most of the written indigenous languages in many West African societies or countries were actually written by the Europeans or the missionaries. It was reduced into writing by these people. Now let's take a look at Nigeria. When you go to Nigeria, for instance, one of the lasting works of the Christian Missionary Society, CMS, was the development of literature in the Yoruba. So they also reduced, of course, the Yoruba language into writing. Among several others, the native bishop, Ahija Crowther, also produced the first translation of the Bible in Yoruba for language. And then in 1859, the first newspaper in Yoruba, also called the Iwi Irohim, was also published by the missionaries. So you can see that both in Ghana and Nigeria, the Yoruba language, the Twi, the Nzima, the Kan were all reduced into writing by these missionaries. In Gambia, for instance, the first principal of what later became known as the Gambia High School, blah, 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 yeah. So they also wrote, Reverend James Fieldhouse also produced the Wolof grammar in 1876. All these testify, and today, if West Africans can write their indigenous languages, it is because the missionaries studied these languages and decided to write them down. Let's take a look at the fourth one. Health services was also very, very important. The missionaries did not only train the missionaries did not only preach to the African, but the welfare, the health being of the African was also paramount to them. So they set up, hospitals in all the areas that they were operating. Now, example, if you go to in Nigeria, for instance, one of the first group of missionaries to introduce organized medical services were the Roman Catholics. And the Catholics did a lot, even in Ghana. Father Jane Maria Conquered, operating in and from Abukuta for 40 years, was also renowned among the Igba as priest and surgeon in the second half of the 19th century. Now, in 1892, the Church Missionary Society also opened the Aya Enu for hospitals in Onisha, all right, which is today a leading hospital in Anambra State. So the Aya Enu Hospital in Onisha, of course, today was actually built by or established by missionaries, okay? And then in Ghana, for instance, the Roman Catholic sisters also provided medical services in the upper and the northern parts of Ghana, even long before the government, plan of building hospitals. Other Roman Catholic hospitals were built in 9 regions in Ghana, including Esikuma, Asimfosu, Achim, Swedru, Brekum, and so on and so forth. So in health-wise, the missionaries also did a whole lot for the African. The next one had to do with the suppression of slave trade. In as much as some scholars argue that the missionaries were part of the slave trade, they were also part in launching a campaign to ensure that the slave trade was suppressed, or abolished. And so they also did that in that regard. The next one also had to do with education. Perhaps this was the greatest service of the missionaries, that was promoting Western education and the development of vernacular literature. We've already talked about the vernacular literature. Now, this is not also to say that West Africans didn't have education. West Africans had a formal way of education, all right? But, the informal, the informal way of education, where you learn from your father or mother or a relative or somebody else. Formal education or Western education was introduced to the West Africans. Schools were established, if you go to Ghana, for instance, today, the famous schools or government schools were all missionary schools, all right? Good. And until almost the end of the colonial period, education was still in the hands of the churches. It was only after the Second World War that the colonial government started to show a real interest in the promotion of formal education in West Africa. And so, like I was saying, we go to Ghana today, and even in Nigeria, in the Gambias, the best performing schools today were all established by the missionaries. You can talk of the Forabe institution, you can talk of Infant Stipim School, and all of that. So I think these are many more were some of the contribution of Christian missionaries to West Africa. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, and thank you for watching. Have a nice day, and bye-bye.